Welcome to Women of Steel with me, Miriam Grace, the podcast where women who've had their mettle tested help us make important links for ourselves. When I last spoke to Imogen Ragone from BodyIntelligence, we explored how she managed the stress of caring for elderly parents. I wanted to know more about the later stages of her mother's dementia, and so I caught up with her again to continue to explore how Alexander technique, presence, and connecting with her nervous system were helpful in connecting with her mother in the later stages of the illness. Today, I'm welcoming back Imogen. Welcome, Imogen.
Hello, glad to be here.
Last time you were on, Imogen, we were talking about how it was for you when your mum was diagnosed with dementia and some of the challenges you faced. And at the end, you gave a few little tips around how you managed and how you use your body intelligence work to support yourself. So we thought there was so much that we didn't get to say. And we thought, given that some of our listeners really resonated with what you were saying and are going through similar experiences, we'd like to hear a little bit more about what happened for you, and we'd love some more tips on how to take care of ourselves when we're going through carer's stress, I suppose we might call it.
Yes, indeed. In our last conversation, most of the challenges and what we were talking about related to the period when both my mother and my father were still living at home and getting more and more home help coming in of various sorts. And it was getting to the point where it was becoming untenable anyway. And then my father died suddenly. I mean, it wasn't out of the blue in the sense that he was in his 90s, but it wasn't, a case where you kind of called to the deathbed and it was just, so I wasn't in the country. And it feels like then when my mum went into a care home, the challenges became of a somewhat different nature. The day-to-day personal challenges were much easier because I knew, for instance, she couldn't get out and go wandering in the night and I'd be called by the police.
Which did happen.
Which did happen a few times, and ended up having to basically keep her locked in the house, which is an awful thing to say, because anyway, so that was part of the kind of fear. But it felt like there was this next kind of part of that journey, which I think the kind of through line for me through this part is how I could be with myself and stay kind of steady and calm, being with her or in a kind of challenging situation. And it definitely was not something done perfectly, but that's kind of the through line. And then it actually kind of really relates to some of the work I'm doing with my students now. I can kind of see that. And so just to tell a little bit of the story, is that, we found her a place, and you actually came with me to look at a couple of the different care homes that we were considering. And it moved quite fast, especially because then I had to go back to the States and then I had to come back. And, plus we'd had to have 24-hour personal care coming in the meantime. So the day came, just a couple of days before I was leaving back to the States, that my mum had to go into the care home. And that in and of itself, it's not something
Mm.
I mean, I wanted it because I wanted the stability of it, but I
Mm.
didn't, the actual process of literally taking her there was something
Mm.
quite different. And that was also the day my mother was oblivious to the fact that my father had died. She would
Mm.
ask where he was. She didn't know. She
Mm.
had seen him. She
Mm.
had been told, I think, by a carer, um, and she wouldn't remember it. But it felt like I did need to have. I'm noticing that I have in my hands here. This is
Yes,
calming for
yes.
me, even
Mm.
telling him this. So that could be, and I think I mentioned this even maybe in the
Mm.
previous podcast. But
Well,
um,
let's just mention it now because not everybody will have heard the previous
yeah,
podcast. But I think the idea is that when we put our own hand on our heart, that our bodies, our nervous system, and so our minds and our psyche experience ourselves being touched, being soothed, being reassured.
yeah. So I'm reassuring myself. It also feels to me like a reminder I'm here now, and I've got me. Like somebody like you say,
Yes.
I've got you. I've got me.
Yes,
So it's
yes,
also
I
kind of a
like
reminder
that.
I'm here now, and
Mm,
I'm experience this thing. Um,
mm,
so there was this moment I thought, I have to do this before we take her to the care home,
mm, mm,
and um, so I had this moment with her, and I was like holding her hands, and I said, I need to tell you, that Dad died. And this look of horror, shock, sadness came
mm,
over her. And then, like within a moment, a second, she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Um, I didn't know him well. Are you? It was something like
mm, mm,
she didn't suddenly remember that this was
mm,
her. She'd known it for a moment, but
mm,
then she
yes.
didn't. And
Mm,
then and then even that moment was over because I must have started holding her hands quite tightly. She's like,
mm,
"Oh, you're hurting my hand," and it was over. And the shocking thing
mm,
was that it was over probably in under a minute,
yes,
and to not be able to share the grief about my father with her um,
yes,
was very strange. In some
yes.
ways, it was easier. I didn't have to worry about her going into the care home and
Mm,
being
mm,
oh, but it was very strange not to have that.
yes.
Uh,
I'm thinking, Imogen, that part of what you're talking about today is about you being present and being present with yourself.
mhm.
But part of what you're describing with your mother was her being present for a split second and then her not being present. So there's something about how how do you remain present with somebody who's not present?
Well, indeed, or someone who is so present to the here and now, nothing else that's within that
Yes.
presence
Mm.
gets in, because of course she was more present to the fact that there was a stronger grip than she liked, whereas
Yes.
I was more present to the emotions of, and
Yes.
what we really ideally want is all of it,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
but I was emphasizing one part and she was in that moment emphasizing another. But I have to say, to get myself to this moment took some presence for me, some kind of grounding and centering. And we'll
Mm.
kind of get a little bit more to that
Yes. I
later. But
want,
that was
yeah.
a key moment. And then, of course, just taking her to the care home, and we had this kind of little photo shoot in the garden in her
Yes.
garden, and
Mm.
the photos looked lovely and happy, and they were, and yet my heart was beating wildly, at the thought that the taxi was coming and we had to get her
Mm.
in and do all this.
Yes,
Because
yes.
she didn't, we'd told her,
Mm.
you're going to this place. She didn't really understand what it was, but you're going somewhere to stay, that they're going to look after you while I'm in
Mm.
America. And, you know,
Mm. Mm.
but,
Mm.
it was gone a moment later. So she didn't know what was coming.
Yes, if I can just take us down a bit of a therapy avenue sidetrack here for a moment, Imogen, it's important that if people are listening and they've had similar experiences, to understand that there's still that need, and we can see that need in you to have your story land somewhere, so that in talking about this, and I think you found this last time you came on, that in talking about it, although it's emotional, that it's meeting, or in Gestalt therapy we would say it's completing this Gestalt, or completing this need to share that grief. It didn't land on deaf ears, but it didn't land in the way that it would have done if she hadn't been unwell in the way that she was.
Well,
And
she'd probably
so,
been one to tell me if it had been,
yes,
yeah. So,
absolutely.
mhm.
So the importance of women sharing their stories with each other, supporting each other, um, and sometimes, certainly with bereavement and this type of loss, sometimes the story needs to be told again and again and again. um, is is absolutely crucial to the healing, because it's not just saying it, it's being heard. And
Mm.
you really experience the jarring of not being heard properly by your mum there. So I'm glad that you can be heard, not just by me but by those listening, and really encourage people listening to allow themselves to be heard, and for their supporters to know it's not just the month it happens or the year it happens. Let's say maybe the decade it happens, or even the lifetime that it happens in, that people need to tell their stories.
Mm. Yeah. I noticed, I wasn't expecting it from the last time we talked, how helpful it was and how much it brought up. And it's, since then, thinking about that there was this kind of next stage in the journey, um,
Mm.
that
Yes.
had a different tone to it, that
Yes.
wasn't so anxiety filled. Although there certainly were moments, not everything was perfect at every moment with the care
Mm.
home, but it wasn't as anxiety filled as when they were
Mm.
both living at home.
Yes.
But it was more to do with, so after this, for the next few years until she did die, I was coming over to Sheffield 3 or 4 times a year for a couple of weeks still, as I was, and I would stay with a dear friend, Miriam,
Mm.
and go and visit my mother in the care home. And that became increasingly challenging in kind of knowing what to do or how to interact with her when I was there.
Mm.
And, at the beginning, I would take photos, family photos, and photos of a grandson, and
Mm.
and this was usually very helpful because she'd
Mm.
like that, and she'd put, even if
Mm.
she couldn't name everybody, but she
Mm.
recognized it and it was interesting. But after a certain point, that just went away. Something that wasn't physically present, a flat photo,
Mm.
was meaningless to
Mm.
her.
Mm.
And a normal conversation was not possible, as and I found myself getting quite anxious about knowing what to do, and also the kind of feelings of what I should do, or what will the care home staff think of me if I'm not there for very long, or if I don't visit every single day,
Yes.
or what will other people, and there's
Mm.
no one right way to do this. My mother didn't know if I visited every day, every hour, every year. um
Mm. Mm.
you know but she
Yeah.
always responded positively even when she couldn't say or know my name, you know
Yes.
um
Yes. Mm.
um so I also want to just put out there that you have to do it in a way that doesn't kind of totally tear you apart. um
Yes. Yes.
you know
Yeah. Yes.
I felt like I just couldn't go every single day. That's if I needed a day
Yes.
off occasionally and things
Yes.
to.
Yes. So you're really inviting people to um, support themselves and care for themselves and listen to their feeling of enough. Time to leave the care home now. There are a couple of things that are perhaps not that relevant, but that I remember about some of the things your mother remembered long after she forgot many other things. And one of them was there was some sheet music on her coffee table quite early on when she moved in, and I saw her playing, her fingers moving, playing the piano, so she was able to see the notes, and that pathway, presume a neural
Yeah.
pathway. Her fingers knew what to do, even though she wasn't really able to have a conversation about
Yeah,
what it was.
absolutely. And that was one thing, she was a musician, a music teacher, a pianist,
Mm,
and playing the piano was the one thing that stayed with her beyond when a lot of things, when she couldn't even dress herself. She
mm,
couldn't play to the standard that she could have done before, but
mm.
she was at an extremely high standard before, and so she still
Yes.
played pretty competently for a long while. And even when it wasn't that competent, it was still a very enjoyable, and I think it was a place where she had some sense of her own identity. Maybe that's me interpreting it, but it felt
Mm.
like that. There was a bit of my mum that I knew from before was there.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
and actually that kind of relates to one of the ways I came to how it helped with interacting with her at the stage where she was not very verbal. It wasn't that she couldn't say anything, but she didn't
Mm.
say much and you couldn't have a conversation. Is I started singing little songs to her. I mean,
Mm.
very simple things. I mean, the one I remember most is singing Teddy Bear's Picnic. So things from her own childhood and that were brought into my childhood. And
Yes.
I mean, it incredibly helped me because you're doing this fun little thing. But
Mm.
it helped her. She didn't exactly sing along, but she was in the rhythm and she'd be kind of humming a little bit, and when it
Mm.
finished, she'd kind of doing, she'd tap and do it, or something
She
like
did.
that.
She did, didn't she? Wasn't
Yeah.
it? Oh, I do like to be beside the
Oh, and
seaside,
that,
and she
well,
did
that
tiddly
too.
on pom
Yeah.
pom, didn't she, or
Yes,
something like
yes,
that?
yes.
And
So you get the,
she knew. Mm, mm, mm,
yeah. And a few times other residents kind of, because we'd
mm,
be in the, the lounge there for
mm,
the memory unit. Um,
mm.
um, but a couple of other residents would kind of come along, which wasn't my intention, but they'd be sort of singing along.
Yes,
So that ended up, it feels a little vulnerable, kind of suddenly kind of singing to someone. I mean, I wasn't singing out loud to the room. It was kind of,
yes,
fairly quietish between me and her and anyone that was very
yes.
close. But there's a bit of vulnerability in just starting to sing. you
It
know.
was worth it, wasn't it,
Mm,
to
mm.
step outside that social comfort zone. Now, in a minute, we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, I think you're going to show us some of the techniques that we could actually practice and learn along with you after the break, and we'll continue a little bit more on how to stay present in really uncomfortable or unfamiliar situations, using this as an example.
Are you coming out later in life? Are you partnered with someone who is? The Women with Women conference has you covered. Meet like-minded people and hear from authors, therapists and specialists at a beautiful venue in Sheffield. The first Women with Women conference is set for June 2025, and with limited spaces, tickets are available at womenofsteel.co.uk. We'll see you there. This event is not open to men or straight people.
Well, welcome back. Today I'm talking with Imogen about how to stay present when it's really quite uncomfortable or difficult. And the example, very personal example that Imogen's brought today and in a previous episode, is about her mother's dementia, Alzheimer's, and her relationship with her mother, and how she was able to sustain that without, I think you used the phrase, without tearing yourself apart, Imogen. So we'd all like to know more about that, and I'm excited to learn the cycle with you today. That I think is something that we might all be able to use, even if our circumstances are different to yours.
Yeah, for sure. So I was sharing before the break how I would often use singing to
Mm,
be and kind of be able to interact with my mother. And sometimes, and especially as things progress further, I would still use the singing right to the end, on almost to deathbed.
mm,
Um, but the other thing that really helped me be with her when you couldn't have a conversation, it wasn't like a normal thing, is that, and to just sit and hold a hand and be with all that was going on could be really challenging. All the feelings, all the, if anyone has a parent in a dementia unit, it's not the most pleasant place to be. There's a lot of weird things going on, let's say,
mm,
with
mm,
different residents, and it's strange. And for me, very just going in there, let alone my mother being a resident, was uncomfortable in and of
mm,
itself. So one of the things I would do while I would just sit holding her hand, which she liked, was do a practice in my head called the cycle, um, which is something that I teach to all my students these days. But it helped me be there. It helped me be sending myself kind of calming messages. So I wasn't sort of running away. I could have totally just sat there, scrolled on my phone, but I wouldn't have been with my mum then.
mm,
I would have been physically there, but I would have not actually
mm,
been present to her. Or I could be in all the kind of anxiety, sadness, grief, fear,
mm, mm,
all the stuff, uncomfortableness of being there. And that would be what I would be transmitting to her, which wouldn't
mm,
really be the best thing. So it's not to say they weren't there, but it's kind of a both and. It doesn't have to be that's the all consuming thing.
mm,
So kind of let me be present to me, have a little bit of more calm going into
mm,
my system, and then there's a little more calm that's going on between us non-verbally, which is
Mm.
how most communication takes place anyway.
Yes.
So
Non-verbally. You're, just to emphasize that, you're it's you're referencing a belief that most of our communication as human beings goes on non-verbally.
yes, I believe that, and I also believe there's a lot of studies and evidence that supports that, which I cannot cite right now.
Yes, yeah.
And as Shay Seaborn, who co-teaches a course we do for people, especially women dealing with chronic stress trauma, she likes to say and remind us that it's we interact on a nervous system to nervous system level. That's mostly what we're
Yes.
and
Yes.
that is what I wanted for my mother. I didn't want to use more of that kind of neuroscience terminology. I didn't want to be having the really dysregulated nervous system be what she was receiving from me. So
yeah,
would you
I'm
like
ready
to know what the cycle is? I think
yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to do it.
Yes. So usually when I teach it with a student, there's there's various other explorations that we might do, and we don't need to know all that to get some benefit from it. So for this, the cycle takes about 2 or 3 minutes. You can do shorter versions, you can do longer versions, you can just do it in your head incessantly when you're sitting with someone with dementia. But the idea is we're going to be practicing constructive thinking, which is a concept in the Alexander technique and in my work, which is when you kind of give yourself a little message kind of from brain to body. It's not something that you have to make happen. It's more that this little message is a little seed of a possibility that might not be what your habit or it might be. And there are various different words you can use. So there's nothing that's set in stone about the phrase that I'm going to say now, but it is a phrase that I use a lot. And it is a phrase that the vast majority of my students seem to find very helpful. And so these words are, I am free to notice ease. So without taking too long about it, those particular words have been chosen quite deliberately. It's not, I have to. I'm free to is maybe I'll notice something, maybe I won't. I'm free to do it, I'm free not to do it. It's kind of like a little invitation, a possibility, but it's not forced, it's open. Yes, and then it's notice. I don't have to go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that when you say to somebody relax, then they start to try to relax, and as soon as we try to do something, we engage tension.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not foolproof, but the words in themselves are helping to switch off that kind of trying, forcing, efforting part of us. So I am free to notice. It's not even feel, so you don't have to feel at ease. But remembering the free to, you don't even have to notice any ease. So it could be, and then ease in itself is just, it can be just somewhere in your physical body that maybe feels a little more comfortable than most of us. If we kind of notice what's going on in ourselves, we go straight to the part that's painful, uncomfortable, itching, bothering us in some way. And that's important. So this is not about negating that. It's like an and. Maybe there's another possibility somewhere else. And it can also be outside of us. It doesn't, and it's not anything perfection. And remember the and free to. Doesn't matter if you don't notice a darn thing. So the cycle is just a way to practice thinking in this way. And what we do is we take each finger in turn, starting with the thumb of the left hand. Doesn't have to be the left hand, I just usually start. I'm holding it up here for people who are watching on the video, but ideally you're just holding your hands in your lap, nice and easy, so you don't have to hold them up, so we don't have to add more effort than needed.
And people are less likely to notice as well.
And less likely to notice. And as I said, you can just do the thinking part, but having practiced with this little physical action, what we're going to do is for each finger, I'll count to 4, and for each count, we'll practice thinking. I'm free to notice ease, and then we'll go to the next finger, and cycle all the way through. So that would be like a full cycle. It should only take 2 to 3 minutes. Is that okay for your podcast?
Yes, yeah, I think so.
All right, let's do the cycle. So before we begin, you might just notice your contact with whatever surface you're resting on. Know that you are supported physically, and the space around you. And so we're going to begin with the thumb of the left hand. 1, I'm free to notice ease. 2, I'm free to notice ease. 3, I'm free to notice ease. 4, I am free to notice ease. Next finger. 1, I'm free to notice ease. 2, I'm free to notice ease. 3, I'm free to notice ease. 4, I'm free to notice ease. Middle finger. 1, I'm free to notice ease. 2, I'm free to notice ease. 3, I'm free to notice ease. 4, I'm free to notice ease. Ring finger. 1, I'm free to notice ease. 2, I'm free to notice ease. 3, I'm free to notice ease. 4, I'm free to notice ease. And little finger. 1, I'm free to notice ease. 2, I'm free to notice ease. 3, I'm free to notice ease. 4, I'm free to notice ease. So before we move to the thumb of the right hand, I just want to remind people that it's okay, it's normal if your mind wanders, if you notice the pain or discomfort, if you're having trouble noticing anything. All your job is to then at the next number just come back to thinking that thought, and you can just think of it like you're sending it out. It doesn't matter whether you notice anything at all. Your job is just to kind of send it out there. So let's do the other hand, starting with the thumb of the right hand. 1, I'm free to notice ease. 2, I'm free to notice ease. 3, I'm free to notice ease. 4, I'm free to notice ease. Next finger. 1, I'm free to notice ease. 2, I'm free to notice ease. 3, I'm free to notice ease. 4, I'm free to notice ease. Middle finger. 1, I'm free to notice ease. 2, I'm free to notice ease. 3. I'm free to notice ease. 4. I'm free to notice ease. Ring finger. 1. I'm free to notice ease. 2. I'm free to notice ease. 3. I'm free to notice ease. 4. I'm free to notice ease. And your little finger. 1. I'm free to notice ease. 2. I'm free to notice ease. 3. I'm free to notice ease. 4. I'm free to notice ease. So that's the cycle. A very brief introduction to it. You can see that it's simple. And there can be some challenges to it when we first start doing it. What did you notice, Miriam?
I think on the first hand, there was part of me going, hurry up. And then I think it was probably on the second finger of the second hand, I just sort of thought, I can't even help myself. I'm feeling very relaxed and peaceful, and I was hoping that people might contact us after listening to this to let us know what happened for them. I think, there's another topic for another time perhaps comes up, which is, how hard it is to stop and slow down. And certainly within me, the need to provide content, and knowing that, we're recording for a podcast and feeling that, we should be delivering content, and of course we are, I'm not putting down the cycle at all, but it's so countercultural for us just to be sitting here apparently doing nothing, but I'm sure you would argue that we're not doing nothing.
Well, yes, we were not doing nothing, and I totally relate, especially today, doing this in the kind of context of our podcast, where people don't have as much kind of background information on kind of the whys and wherefores. We're doing this maybe strange thing, but I noticed that my mind would wander to, oh, we're recording, and wanting to not take too long, and then just come back to the next number. Free to notice these, and I definitely felt calmer after doing it than before.
So it was a very
so
genuine.
That's basically what would be happening in my head while I'd be with my mum. So it might be like, oh, it's horrible in here. Free to notice ease. Oh, look at mum, she doesn't look like I'm free, so they kind of but it would just be kind of keep coming back, and it just enabled me to stay with kind of like I said before, without distracting myself or removing myself mentally, but also not getting into all the stuff either.
Absolutely. So anybody listening that, was able to tolerate the slowness and the nature of the cycle is having a really full experience, just as you and I are recording it, which is of the adrenaline in us is, hurry up, drive forward, get on with it. And the cycle itself is counter to all our cultural conditioning, and we just keep coming back to it. And and in that sense, doing nothing is a radical act.
I agree. And just relating to that experience with my mother again, I mean, a lot of adrenaline going to go and see her. a lot of like, wanting to be able to help her. What can I do? And there was nothing I can do. And the best thing that I could do was to be with her in a in a present, hopefully somewhat calm, supportive way.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And this really, I know we're coming to the end of our time now, but is so helpful when we tie it in with some of the theory that I've shared with you and that we've used on our body mind workshops of the safe uncertainty, which is how we live in uncertain times or uncertain situations with keep coming back to a safety within us, and it is possible to unhook the sense of safety from the need to know for certain what is going to happen next. But that's will have to be another episode. So I'm wondering, Imogen, now as we wrap up, just imagining the listener being at this point. So the part of your life you're talking about, this was 2019, was it? Really? Yes. So, and we're recording this in 2024, so five years later. So imagining people perhaps in a similar place to you and where you were in 2019, what would you like to say to them?
The more you can do to enable yourself to have moments of presence in the here and now, I think the better, because it's not a nice place to be, and every part of me wanted to run away. I didn't want to run away because I wanted to be there for my mum. And so maybe I'm more in flight mode was what I'm, thinking about fight or flight. But for others, it might be like doing all, but it'd be very hard to just be in the uncertainty.
Yes, to stay.
And the uncomfortableness of what is here now. So the more you can do to find ways that helps ground you to be here now, and at the risk of jumping to something else right at the end, but it relates, is that when we can do this, and the cycle and the kind of principles behind that have really supported me, have really carried through into other parts of my work. I work with a lot of women now who are in very either challenging situations now or have had, one or two of them really quite horrendous things happen, traumatic things be part of their lives. And, we're not doing therapy, we're not doing your work. And yet sometimes people do want to say something and, about what's happened to them and, or what's going on, or we can see that they're very upset. And it helps me and others, even when we're in a group situation, to be with that. We're not jumping in to try and fix and advise, which is the last thing that most people need in that situation. We're also not like, oh, you'll be fine, and running away, but we're being with.
Yes.
It's this sort of practice that has enabled me to be with. And,
yes, how useful, not just for the traumatized, but for the listeners, for the therapists, for the relatives.
It can really translate to any challenging situation where you need or want to be there, but another part of you really doesn't.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and, sharing your lived experience of something that you've been able to translate into a useful structure for other people to use. And that's very much the heart of this podcast, is facing things and letting them, help us grow. Of course, we're never glad, and neither should we be, for the awful things that do happen in life. But it's comforting to know that we can share with each other ways of getting through. And I appreciate your courage to stay with your mum. I think that really is love in action to stay with. So thank you, Imogen.
Thank you. And just a little challenge for your listeners to try the cycle on your own and see how it goes. Let us know.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you. Imogen's experience helps us connect with how non-verbal communication is such a crucial part of our human relationships, and helps us understand how hard it is at the end of life to communicate without language. We both hope that her ideas and strategies are helpful for you if you're facing something similar. Thank you for listening to Women of Steel, created and hosted by me, Miriam Grace, psychotherapist at Blue Skies. If you'd like to know more about my work as a therapist and writer, you can follow me on social media. Please take a look at the show notes for information and contact details. And in the meantime, be kind to yourself.